go in and buy up all the corporations with our tax money and build their own empires and control it. You have the communism and the socialism publicly being funded by the Rockefellers to consolidate power overseas, where they couldn't take people down, where monarchies wouldn't play ball with them. I mean, it's the same thing over and over and over and over and over and over again, and now it's all coming together. It's all coming down. You talked about how you crunched the numbers of the states with the highest tax rates, the biggest governments, the biggest surpluses, with gun laws. Tell the viewers about that.
About 4 years ago, I did a little chart comparison. I looked at states with the least stringent gun laws, and I looked at the states with the most oppressive gun laws. I made a chart, least at one end, most oppressive on the other end. I then looked at the states with the most taxes, fines, and fees levied per populace, and the state with the least taxes, fines, and fees levied. Put them in order, made a chart. Well, guess what? If you put the charts back to back, an exact parallel. The more taxes, fines, and fees extorted from the populace, the most oppressive gun laws possible. The least amount of taxes, fines, and fees extorted from the populace in a state, the most lax on the gun laws. Exact parallel.
Elaborate on that.
Well, if you go into a state where, like Vermont or Montana, very low taxation, least oppressive, even though they're catching up with everybody else, they had very lax gun laws. We go into a state like New Jersey, where the public is being extorted from any which angle and shape and form from all areas of government, city, county, and state, and the police and the judicial, maximum fines. You have the most stringent gun laws possible in this country.
So it's simple. With financial slavery, with total governmental/private fraud in basic fascist collusion, with this type of development, you're going to have a disarmed population. Hence, Hitler was for gun control. Stalin was for gun control. Mao, they disarmed the slaves. Hence, the United Nations is for gun control, because it was founded by the very banking interests that now run this nation, that run this world, openly funded by them, the same people that set up Patch 1313 in Chicago to start the National Association of Counties, the National Association of Cities, of governors, of mayors, of county commissioners, to standardize the policies.
And here's a very dangerous point, Alex, being that they have already accomplished control and ownership of the wealth of this country from the public now becomes a liability. So it is in their interest right now to eliminate a good chunk of the public. Because they now own the wealth. They control the wealth of this country.
I was on some of the financial sites, Morgan Stanley, Dean Witter, and others this weekend doing research on that. And they have composite indexes on there, what the fastest growing part of the economy is. Until a month and a half ago, it was still tech stocks, the internet. Number two had always been prison industry. Walter, it's now number one. They're building prisons everywhere. They're militarizing the police.
If you look at the prison industry and the court system, it is the most profitable corporation in this country. The court system and the prison system generates more money than 10 of the largest Fortune 500 companies in this country.
Put together.
Business.
And that's another public number. I mean, folks, the fact is they have convinced you that the government's in trouble, the state, the local, the water district. They need more money, they need more regulations, they need more taxes, because they're bankrupt. When in truth, they own 78% of Xerox, 60% of Motorola, every major traded company, all of the Dow 30. You've looked at the Dow 30. What percentage of the Dow 30 in the aggregate do state and city and federal agencies own?
You're talking, if you look on an individual basis, stock by stock, composite government wealth right now is the market. We're talking probably about in excess of 70% of the ownership is controlled by composite government funds. The public is insignificant in the marketplace.
And you looked, and to use a case point example, the city of Manhattan. You've got those numbers there. I know you did today on the radio, and after the show, went and actually checked it out. It's right there. They brag about this. In 1989 or 1990, you looked at Manhattan, not just states with hundreds of billions. What did Manhattan have, the city of Manhattan?
My progression after looking at the state of New Jersey, I looked at the state of New York. And the state of New York had approximately $535 billion. And then I got the city of Manhattan's report, which covered the boroughs, Bronx, Brooklyn, Queens, and so forth. They had $1.2 trillion, more than the entire state had on their books.
And that's in cream. That's in private investments.
And also, a couple of years later, Manhattan was crying poverty and had a tax increase.
And then you look at the
bailed out by the feds, supposedly.
And you look at the so-called. Let's use another example for folks. Let's throw it all in their face. Orange County.
Orange County. You had a couple of slap-happy investment managers who were playing around with derivatives and got their fingers burnt. They lost $1.3 billion of the money.
Wow, a county just with derivatives, the most speculatory, dangerous thing in the market. Just $1.3 billion, just a county.
The derivative market, as said by Alex Greenspan several months back, he said he was concerned being that the derivative market was up to $80 trillion. And the government is the primary player in the derivative market. But Orange County attracted all of this attention. Now, one person happened to stumble across Orange County's comprehensive annual financial report. And he looked and he saw that they had $16 billion in profitable investments. They were only talking about their losing transaction.
But they couldn't control the media on that. It was out for a while that they lost $1.3 billion in a very speculative area of the market. But they had to have a tax increase, almost went bankrupt, so the people had to pay more, almost like that was done on purpose when they really had tens of billions of extra that was profitable in the market.
There's an economist by the name, and he owns a bank, Anthony Hargis, out in California. He looks at comprehensive annual financial reports, determines that local government's cash position, and determines how long could they operate, existing from their existing cash without charging one nickel in taxes, fines, or fees. Now, in Orange County's case, when they were crying bankruptcy, they could have gone on for another 11.9 years, performing the exact same services without taxing one nickel before they ran out of cash.
And that's not taking into account if they invested the tens of billions of surplus dollars in that one county and then took the surplus of that and reinvested it. And if they didn't do that, they could have taken it and paid dividends, that's checks, to the property owners.
Well, the bottom line, to cut to the chase, is if the public at this point in time unifies with basic comprehension, if you capture 10% of the population with basic comprehension, you can administratively restructure government at this point in time to phase out all forced taxation in this country.
Well, Walter, I want to stop you. I want to get to that a little bit later, because for people that have just joined us, the audience gets much larger as the show progresses over 2.5 hours. I want to recap who you are, what we're talking about, what's happening, and why this is so important. Folks, I know when you hear about budget or money or taxes, you tune out, you're sick of it. It's been designed that way. You think government is bankrupt, in trouble. In truth, they are the most opulently rich and controlling class around. They are merged with private industry, and that's why the mainstream media won't even begin to talk about it. I want to briefly recap, Walter, exactly what we're dealing with here, and then I want to talk about the amazing solutions that you and others have and that will actually work.
Well, the bottom line is your listeners now know why Gorbachev went Democratic.
People think they're free and put a lot more weight on their back.
More money, more control.
And you talked about if the American people were a gerbil, what are we doing right now?
I always used to give the expression, the way the system works is they keep the chipmunk running on the treadmill, chasing the carrot. As through trickle-down economics, they provide just enough revenue to keep the chipmunk running at optimum proficiency as they tap off 80% of the energy produced.
And I also had my own little analogy, and I think I'm going to put an editorial on the website or maybe make T-shirts up of it, talking about the massive government, how big it is, what it controls, 70% of the market, 70% of the companies.
Alex, just one quick notation. I noticed 45% of the revenue is invested internationally. They get some of their best rates of return on the international companies. I went shopping for Christmas. Every item I picked up said made in China. You now know the reason for NAFTA, GATT, the whole 9 yards. The government funds are investing with the international corporations, producing the product at 10 cents on the dollar and selling it back at 40 cents on the dollar here in the States, accentuating their profits.
And we're talking about water districts, counties, cities, the states, the feds, Texas with a $435 billion surplus every year that keeps getting invested into the trillions. And they're telling you that they're broke, ladies and gentlemen. Walter, talk about how China and its 1.25 billion slaves fits into all of this.
China?
You were talking about the investments over there through the companies owned by the government.
I'm breaking it down. I just saw the composite government funds in their notes section. They usually authorize about 10% of the revenue invested with a group called the Asian Development Authority, and 10% of the revenue invested with the African Development Authority. And if you look at a comprehensive annual financial report, especially on one of the investment pools or one of the large government pension funds, it breaks down exactly where the money is invested, who's holding what, and the dollar amount. Everyone should get a copy of their state retirement fund for the state employees. It breaks down where the money is invested. And they'll see the majority in international stocks versus U.S. stocks at this point in time. The growth factor is more for international.
In fact, a lot of retirees and folks out there saying, hey, leave it alone. The system may be corrupt, but it's my pension. Explain that you have giant surpluses out of the pensions that are being invested that they'll never see.
Arizona, the total actuarial liability for all state retirees and participants in the plan for being 100% funded, all active employees and retired, required $14.5 billion. The current fund balance is verging on over in excess of $32 billion. The employees will never see that money and never benefit from it. The Arizona legislature a couple of years ago, being that the employers, the cities, the counties, the school districts, and the employees were contributing to something where no way they should be contributing one dime, and in fact they should have been getting substantial refunds back, they passed their own internal statutes to make the pension fund strictly participatory, requiring a minimum of a 2.18% contribution from the employee and the employer. So the government employees are getting shafted in many cases also.
So recapping, Walter, again, using the example of the comprehensive annual financial report for, give me a close shot, guys. Thanks. I want to say the crew's doing a great job. For 1999, and then you look at 1998, $435 billion surplus. Carol Keaton Rylander's own report right here, and then you count all the counties. What is it, 100 of them in Texas?
Get your hands on 1996. In the notes section, it shows the transaction the state government made for local governments. They show $1.8 trillion in transactions for local government.
And that's nationwide.
No, that was state of Texas.
State of Texas.
1.8 trillion.
Why? I've got some of the past years. This is the last one that's out in 99. Why are the reports getting smaller and smaller now that you've been exposing them? And how do we get that other information that they're now cutting out of them?
You have to look at a prior year's comprehensive annual financial report and see where certain areas all of a sudden get clipped or disappear in their entirety. And then you have a lead list to say what happened to these funds, where can I see the accounting?
And that's all because a successful commodities trader and financial advisor in New Jersey found out that the whole thing is a giant stinking fraud 10 years ago and started talking about it 3 years ago and made a documentary film and has done hundreds of radio interviews. Now, suddenly, I remember years ago, Walter, you could call and get one of these pretty quick. Sometimes they'll give the runaround. You have had a massive effect on others by talking about this ad. We need to keep pushing viewers. We're talking about budgets. We're talking about comprehensive annual financial reports. You're saying boring. Walter, recapping before we talk about the solutions. People that have just joined us, explain the difference between budget, and how that's drilled into our head, and the comprehensive annual financial report.
Well, the beautiful point...
Explain the fraud to people, why this is the biggest game in town.
The beautiful point here is that being that the government for the last, since 1945, created this structure to take over the wealth, and they were successful. They have done it. So we're talking $60 trillion in composite liquid investment wealth held by federal and local governments. That's a phenomenal increase in 30 years. Now, on the composite government pension funds, they generated $4.3 trillion last year. Total taxation in this country in 1999 was approximately $3.6 trillion, federal and local governments. So composite government pension funds generated substantially over total forced taxation in this country. Now, can anyone see, with simple administrative action, restructuring composite government through consolidation of the surpluses into an annuity pension fund set up for the resident property owners and taxpayers, sale of venture and enterprise projects, which government now owns, but they shouldn't, like golf courses, amusement parks, real estate ventures,
hotels,
sell it back to the private sector where it belongs. That generates a phenomenal amount of revenue for consolidation and into the annuity pension fund. And where overgrowth took place, downsizing, because they're collecting the money to pay for that excessive growth. So with downsizing, that revenue becomes available for allocation into the annuity pension fund set up for the resident property.
Yeah, we're about to get to that. The solution is $60 trillion in investments and cream and private that just keeps rolling. They've got 70% of the stock market. That is governments, state, local, federal. They're militarizing the police against us, treating us like slaves, squeezing us, saying they need more when they basically already own everything. Even your mortgage is predominantly owned by government interest.
I like to use one example, Alex, which is very simple and very basic, but 100% true. If every one of your listeners had an 11 and 12-year-old boy, and they gave him carte blanche to write their own allowance check each week, and you made $1,200 a week, within no time they'd be cutting a check for $1,000 a week. And if you told them you're going to cut them back to $800 a week, they'd kick, they'd scream, they'd holler, they'd use any logic available to them to justify how an 11 and 12-year-old boy could not survive on $800 a week. There is no difference here whatsoever. You just have bigger boys and sharper players.
But recapping for those that are just joining us, I know you've gone over this 1,000 times, Walter, the difference between the budget that we always hear about in the press and this big secret, the comprehensive annual financial report that all the media and everybody else, the corporations, know full well about because the government is their owners.
Well, the bottom line is the budget is strictly annual operating expenses, what they're going to spend for the year and what they're going to bring in for the year.
So all of the losses are there.
The expenses for operating government and what they're going to tally and tax the public to perform these functions.
And people think that the budget is the whole financial universe of government and private industry, but in truth, it is the comprehensive annual financial report. Isn't the second set of books, it is the books.
Correct. The comprehensive annual financial report will show the budget. They call it the general purpose fund, and it'll show everything else, all other income, the investments that have built up over decades and decades, the net worth of that government. You know, if you lost your job today, Alex, okay, how are you going to pay for your budget, for your house?
Well, I'd have to work for another radio network.
No, you couldn't get a job. You were disabled. If you had an investment fund, say built up over the last 20 years, equal to $1 million.
Well, see, I'm not like the government and these private corporations that work together. I'm not out there with cops squeezing people for money and taxing the daylights out of folks and all of this. I don't have any money.
I did a little logistical survey, even in my own hometown here in Prescott. I looked at taxes, fines, and fees levied against the public in traffic fines via population 20 years ago versus today. 600% increase per population. It's a revenue-generating venture. I mean, if you could pull people over and clip them for $100 any day of the week, you become a millionaire overnight, correct, Alex?
Yeah. And you hire the cop. Well, hold on. You hire the cop. Now they're only hiring cops with low IQs. That's even been in the news. You hire a cop that'll go out. You pay $30-something grand a year. He generates you $1 million. And you just expand and hire more cops. You got the people begging for more cops for some reason when we got more than we ever needed. The number of cops has doubled in the last 8 years. The number of prisons has doubled. The prison population has doubled. People are still begging for more, begging for more, begging for more. Government owns everything. They're expanding.
I go back to, you now know why Gorbachev went Democratic.
Talking about these empires, these water districts, these city councils, these county commissioners, how do the politicians and the minions running these little empires, how do they themselves profit out of this scam?
I'll give you an example from Arizona. Yavapai County, there was a border supervisor, a guy by the name of Feldmeyer, came into office about 9 years ago with a disclosed net worth of about $85,000. He's currently up to over $8 million 10 years later. He made most of his money on land transactions. His latest venture, he bought about 1,600 acres in Prescott Valley. After he buys the property, it was a ranch land with one access road on one side, another access road on the other side, but nothing connecting. And 1 year later, the most beautiful access road goes right through the property. Now, the county fairgrounds and racetrack, which was built 100 years ago, which was too small to handle the need for services, they had to move. Guess where they're going to move? Right next door to his property. Guess what's going up on his property? To the new golf course and condominium complex. Where's the money coming from? The county bank, run by the boys. They'll pull out $5 to $7 million on that venture alone.
And that's just one little county out of hundreds of counties in this country.
And there were a lot of people complaining about him, so there were two groups that started a recall petition against him. And they were the regular public tax protest groups, and they were slowly getting signatures for a recall. He gets his best friends to start a third recall petition against himself. They immediately get all the signatures required, being that they're well networked, and complete the signature requirement. And then they go to the Superior Court judge, his best friend. I'm an elected official. I can't have 3 recall petitions against me at the same time. You're going to have to invalidate 2 of them. Guess which 2 they invalidated? The citizens' recall petition. The third one started off by his friends. Guess what happened to that?
Got dropped.
Dropped, correct. The game is absolute, and we're talking millions of dollars. It's not the Joe's six-pack crowd betting $5 on the football game who's going to win on Dallas. These guys have worked hard to build their little empires. You know, if you went to a cocaine dealer and said, I heard you were dealing $5 million of cocaine this year. Is that true? Oh, you're crazy. I've never even touched this stuff. I don't even know what it looks like. You know? They're going to perpetuate their game. There's a lot of money involved here.
And you talked about how using the Orange County debacle, the feds have now streamlined and make the counties and cities and school districts and water districts funnel their money through their gates. How does that feed into this?
Well, the largest investment pool was the pension funds. And back in 1981, the Fed sent out a transmittal letter to the local governments. But by the way, there's 85,000 separate corporations in local government. They sent out a transmittal letter saying, you in local government have very odd and peculiar rules regarding the management of your pension funds, which keep you restrictive from using such trading vehicles such as derivatives, options, advanced forward currency transactions, puts, calls. This costs you billions of dollars each year. CalPERS, which did very well for the California pension funds, have reorganized under a national program, which we recommend you participate with. Under this program, you will not be restricted to not using derivatives, futures, calls, puts, and options, and thus you can benefit. So in 1981, they created the Mega Market Makers accounts through consolidation of the government pension funds. If you look at the exponential growth in the Dow from 1981 forward, you now know why. Composite government was securing their open interest and takeover of the marketplace. And now they're working on the international marketplace.
How does the United Nations fit into this with the desertification treaty that the Republicans accidentally passed after Clinton signed it? They didn't mean to give the United Nations 70%.
Let's go back.
Well, they gave them 70% of the control over 70% of the land in our country, 100% of it. That's public record now, folks. October 18th, 2000 passed. I thought it was bad 4 years ago, the UN taking over the national parks and monuments. How does the United Nations fit into this? Because the same big bankers that set up the UN are now giving it control over our country. Why is that happening?
let's go back to 1945. There was two pesky little documents that existed in the United States which protected the populace. We had the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. This kept the powermongers from having absolute control over the people. Well, let's create the United Nations, 1945. Corporate headquarters, New York. Let's pay 65% of the dues for all of the member nations so they will participate so we can give some kind of validity to this organization. We don't care if we give them a loan and they default on it after they pay their dues. The IMF will pick up the tab. So here we have the United States boys creating the UN. Now they are giving authority to the UN for judicial, administrative, military authority, property, because the UN is not subject to those two pesky little problems, the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. Thus, the boys controlling the show now have a vehicle they can use, the UN, to control the populace of the United States that is exempt from constitutional law and the Bill of Rights.
And on the screen, we're going to put up Infowars.com that has the desertification treaty and other details and links directly to Congress at Infowars.com for folks to check that out. And I am building a site with Walter Burien's information on Infowars.com about the comprehensive annual financial reports, and that will be up sometime next week. And if you just type in CAFR, CAFR, into a search engine, you'll get thousands of links to government websites bragging about how much money they have and how much stocks and bonds and how many companies they own. It is empire building.
Keep in mind, Alex, they have perpetuated this empire and they are growing unabated. They have accomplished their objective, the complete financial takeover of the wealth of this country.
All right,
recapping. The public continues to fund it.
Recapping, Walter, microcosm, there's counties, cities, states, the feds, cappers. They only tell us about the budget in Texas. Oh, we had a $4 billion surplus in 99. We had a $6.9 billion surplus in 98. We have this big phony political fight between the Republicans and the Democrats, the same people at the top, the same committee people, fighting over how much of that. Hold on.
$1 billion surplus going into the year 2004.
Yeah, fighting over how much of a surplus we'll have, how much they'll give us back in tax cuts, when really in 98 they had $435 billion. The point is, they don't need more money, they don't need more taxes. Taxes could be completely phased out. Now Walter Burien give us the solutions of how this problem could be fixed here in the next 10 minutes.
Well, as I mentioned, I talked to a heavyweight in California and briefed him on the proposal of setting up an annuity pension fund for the resident property owners and taxpayers on a city level, county level, and state level, whereby the surplus revenues are deposited into. The venture and enterprise projects, which no way government should be owning, are sold back into the private sector, golf courses, the whole nine yards, phenomenal assets, which they should not be owning, and where overgrowth took place, downsizing. I gave the example of Arizona, 1,000% increase in 15 years in revenue taken. With those three areas, you create a phenomenal investment pool of funds under this annuity pension fund for the resident property owners and taxpayers. It is written in stone that the principle of operation of this fund, and you get together with a few financial planners and some of the top investment banking groups to write a prospectus for that city, county, or state, having a guideline for phasing out all forced taxation and having the local government operate from that fund, okay? You have the ability of phasing out all taxation in that city, county, or state, and under good, prudent financial management, providing a surplus there whereby the local residents and property owners get a dividend return on top of no forced taxation. It can be done all across the country. What is required at this time is to get a model up on the playing field. Target one city, one county. County would be better, because if you pass it on the county level, every city within that county becomes subject to following the principle of operation of the restructuring under the authority of the will of the public.
Now, Walter...
And he said, this is a massive structure, Walter. How can you possibly implement it? It would take so much time. And my response was, it's already been done.
Now, Walter...
The government pension funds generated $4.3 trillion last year. That's more than all forced taxation in the country.
Now, Walter, before we get back into the solution, I want to remind people of of the fact that not everyone in government is even aware of this. In a county, in a city at the lower level, who are the players that have to be aware of the full nature of the constructive fraud of this organized crime syndicate?
Your city manager is going to be aware. The treasurer of a state will be aware. The auditor general of the state will be aware. The investment banking groups, they're quite aware of the resources. They're constantly bidding to get the money to manage. The best place to look is the Auditor General's office. He gets copies of every single report submitted by local government.
So if the city of Austin is refusing to give locals a copy of their comprehensive annual financial report saying, what is that? I don't know what that is. I never heard of those.
Yeah, you can call the Auditor General's office and they'll say, well, I'll use an example. I'm making up a name here, but Jim Miller produces this for the CPA firm of Smith, and Barney, and their address is, and their telephone number is, and they've prepared the report for the city of Austin for the last 5 years.
And
they'll know exactly who prepares it, where to get a copy, and when you go back to your city and they play dumb, being that you said that, a year and a half ago, I got a call from someone in Pennsylvania. They said, I just spoke to my congressman. I'm good friends with him, and he never heard of this before, but he's going to look into it, and he said he will definitely take some action on this issue as soon as he finds out about it. And, I kind of smiled, and I said, I'm going to put you through on a conference call. I called the mailroom from the Department of Treasury in Pennsylvania that put out the report, and I just basically said, this congressman, it was like about a 4 or 5 term congressman. How long has he been getting the report? Well, he's had it sent to him for the last 8 years. Where did you send it to? We sent it to his office, except for 2 years ago. He was on vacation in the Bahamas, and we sent the report to him in the Bahamas because he wanted to get it while he was on vacation. So here is the congressman saying to his constituent, I never heard of that before. I'm going to have to look into it. And here I confirm to the person that the person's been getting it for 8 years, and in fact, specially requested the report to be sent to them in the Bahamas.
Now, we're about to get back into the solution. For those that don't know what we're talking about, the budget is one small little thing. What government spends in the services, whether it's checkpoints or stealing your children or cramming Ritalin down their throats or actually paving a road like they're supposed to do. And they say, if you don't give us all your money, you're not going to have the roads paved because we're broke. When in truth, here in Texas in '98, $435 billion cream surplus after everything they'd spent just sitting there. 435.
When they cry poverty, saying the road has to be improved, we're going to have a bond issuance of $150 million to pave this road. And I always thought the public was funding that $150 million. When I started looking at the revenue flow, they're using their own investment funds to fund their own bond issuances, locking the public in under more debts.
Now, Walter, getting back into solutions, if we had people that could take over a county, and let's say a smaller county that only had, 200 million, 100 million in surplus and investments, how would it work? How would people do it? I mean, if you walked around and gave out prospectuses and showed folks, hey, this is the county's real surplus, let's vote in good people, let's get those fraudulent voting machines out of there with our county clerk here in Austin who's been caught several times doing it, Annette Dubois, let's get control of the county. How do you, because the people need to know this is real. They're taking the money for themselves. How do we get the forced taxation phased out and get dividends, checks every month sent to the people with this tens of trillions of dollars they have in surplus?
Let's use a county that has $100 million in surpluses. They have approximately $300 million in venture and enterprise projects, which can be sold back into the private sector. Okay, now we're standing with $400 million. Composite government pension funds, Washington did 23% last year, Oregon 22%. We're talking on about $50, $60 billion. So let's say a nice average rate of return of 15%, conservative figure. Okay?
Close to half of what they're really getting.
That's $60 million a year on $400 million. Now, say, for example, the county's operating budget right now is $55 million. Okay? You're generating $60 million. You just satisfied the entire budgetary requirements, which means you can phase out all forced taxation, and there's a $5 million surplus.
That you divide among the 120,000 people that live in the county.
Correct. And as the fund grows, say, for example, you're coming up with a surplus, you keep a certain amount of your surplus to let it grow. And you can actually get quite a nice little dividend check back if you have prudent financial management within that local government and perform all of the normal functions of government.
forever with conservative investments.
And we're standing at a crossroad, Alex. We have a runaway freight train, and if it continues on its current course, we're facing 1,000 years of subserviency and subjugation. 1,000 years.
Yeah, these empires are militarizing, building prisons, county cities, the feds here in Austin, the states. They just built a $93 million justice center. You can't get into it. The stairs aren't for your use. There's one elevator, lines of people, cops with submachine guns, black uniforms, combat boots, barbed wire, prisons everywhere, armored personnel carriers, cameras, microphones hanging out of the trees. They're militarizing against us, and why are they doing that?
They're protecting the empire. I mean, the Roman Empire did the same. Every empire that's ever existed on this planet has done the same. They use the populace. The populace revolts or objects. Then they get more strong-handed with the populace. In fact, what they do is, if the populace objects, they will take more revenue from the populace to make the populace weak, so they cannot object. And currently, right now, I hear people screaming all over the country. They're being raped financially, losing their houses, their jobs, everything else, and being threatened with being put in jail if they don't pay the extortion tariff.
Yeah, I know people in South Austin who are retired who have like maybe $30,000 in the bank they saved. They have nothing. They have one old car that barely works, and the IRS says, hey, you owe us money. Well, no, I don't. Here's we don't want your receipts. Give us $10,000 now and we'll leave you alone. Oh, we're just taking your house. They have a heart attack. Then they get it all. I mean, and it's in the name, well, we gotta, pave the roads and gotta have defense.
Well, the course in the road right now, the other path is 1,000 years of prosperity. The true meaning of the word millennium. We're at a crossroads. We either go into total subjugation or we go into total independence.
We're telling you that they didn't have any money. They were telling you that there was a small surplus, and then we had this big phony fight over who would get little bits and pieces out of it. Ladies and gentlemen, they're taking over. They own most of the stock market. They almost own everything. Do a search on the net for CAFR. You'll get the government's own sites everywhere.
What is essential at this point in time, Alex, is to get a model up on the playing field. Once the model is up, by example, the game is over.
So get a city or county, preferably a county, to do it. Show people taxation phased out in 3 years. Show people with surpluses on top of that. Show them the fraud, that they really own everything, and that we supposedly own this country, and that everybody else will follow suit. If not, we're enslaved. You are the leaders out there. You better take action on this, ladies and gentlemen. It's up to you. Thank you for joining us, Walter Burien.
And then there's the government always telling you, turn in your guns, everything's going to be fine, everything's going to be wonderful. Oh, we had to take those old retired people's home over there in the working class neighborhood. They didn't pay their taxes. Everybody's got to tighten their belt. Well, here is a former Treasury agent, Joe Bannister. In the last 2 years, Mr. Bannister has gone public on national television, in the newspapers, you name it, about how the IRS is a collection agency for the private run-for-profit Federal Reserve that's, running this whole comprehensive annual financial report scam that we've just exposed. Oh, yes, ladies and gentlemen, more and more Americans are fighting this and coming out against the developments. It's time for you to join the team. Many hands make light work. The IRS is a criminal organization. The 16th Amendment was never ratified to give you the income tax. You pay your taxes to the private banks. It's called the New World Order. And now they want to THX 1138 you. That is, dumb you down 110%.
Well, we're here in Northern California, and a few weeks ago on my radio program, we talked to Joe Bannister. In fact, his story's starting to gain a lot of attention. There's going to be an article in Media Bypass, and he's been doing a lot of radio interviews with people that are interested in the truth of what's really happening. He also has a website that contains the letter that he wrote to the IRS Commissioner, Charles Rossetti. And again, his name is Joe Bannister, and he was a special Treasury agent assigned to the IRS to investigate people that were filing fraudulent tax returns or simply hiding assets. And thanks a lot for spending some time with us, Mr. Bannister. God bless.
Thanks, Alex.
basically just start out and tell us a little bit about yourself and how you stumbled upon the truth.
Well, I started out as a CPA. I worked in public accounting, and I decided that I wanted a little more excitement, and I decided to become a law enforcement officer in the federal government. Well, the Internal Revenue Service's his job is to collect income taxes and some excise taxes. And the Criminal Investigation Division, of which I was a part, investigates criminal violations of those tax laws.
And when did you start to, well, tell us how it all began. What made you first want to investigate the Internal Revenue Code yourself and not just take the manuals and the codes that you used when investigating tax evaders?
Well, in December of 1996, I was listening to the radio here in the Bay Area, and I heard a lady named D.V. Kidd come on the radio, and she started saying some very unbelievable things, like the income tax was voluntary, that the 16th Amendment was never ratified, and that that federal income taxes don't go towards providing revenue for the U.S. government. And I thought those claims were awfully outrageous, but she was talking about it on a radio show hosted by a man who I trusted, and that made me want to dig deeper and see what it was she was saying and what evidence she had to back it up.
Absolutely. And so, in 1996, you started investigating. How long did you investigate before you came to your conclusions?
A little over 2 years. So I basically my investigation ended right about the time I was forced to resign.
Can you tell us that story and also get into some of the things that you uncovered that are historical?
Well, I'd say after a good year and a half, I basically in my mind came to the realization that all her claims were correct, that in fact the income tax was voluntary, although it sounds kind of strange to be saying that because we all know that people go to prison, they lose their homes, they have their wages garnished. But the reason that the IRS constantly refers to the income tax as being voluntary is because of our U.S. Constitution and the severe limitations that are placed on the federal government's ability to tax us. So
there are only certain forms of constitutional taxation.
That's correct. That our income taxes do not, provide revenue as I always believed they did. It's more like a cash advance type system where the federal government borrows fiat money from the Federal Reserve, and then our income taxes are used as a vehicle to pay interest on that debt. Well, the printing of the money, another thing that I found out, which totally surprised me, was that they print the money, and there's no value to it, and they, in a sense, print it and out of nothing. They make it out of nothing, simply because they have the power to force us to use the currency.
And it's kind of like a rat in a maze. And we never question the maze itself, never think outside the box. And that's why you're rare. Well, more and more people are in government standing up. This is becoming more and more clear, but it's still rare in the IRS, Mr. Bannister, for somebody to actually pull back and see this. What was it like, let's say, a year into your studies? Because you say you studied for about 2 years before you finally made your decision with the evidence. What was it like about a year into it?
It was very difficult because I took the job thinking that I could use my financial skills to fight crime, go after the bad guys, and I did. Money launderers, drug smugglers. One particular case was even featured on America's Most Wanted, so I was really enjoying myself. So it really it shook my belief system to its very foundations, and it was really very difficult for me to continue doing the job and excelling at it, because my mental state it was difficult, to go to work every day, even though I wasn't daily, arresting tax evaders or people that didn't file tax returns. I wasn't personally doing that, but I still just felt it was very difficult to just go through the day-to-day process of the job, knowing what I was finding out, and not
because you found out that you were putting people in jail for something that the very system itself was doing.
at least the agency as a whole was doing that, and I felt that sooner or later I needed to start speaking out publicly because I felt, clearly a tax can only be voluntary or mandatory, and if it is voluntary, then it is wrong and illegal to prosecute, harass, seize money from people who don't volunteer.
Where does the money go? They throw this fiat money out there. We take the money up, and correct me if I'm wrong, we put labor into it, we work to attain it, and thus they steal our labor.
In a sense, that's correct. I mean, for quite some time, I'd hear D.V. Kidd talking about, the Federal Reserve and how we're slaves, and I didn't really understand what she meant. But when you really spend a little time and educate yourself on the way the process works, it's really very simple economics, and I don't have an economics degree or anything like that, but you can eventually see that when the source of the money supply is a bank and the destination of the money supply is a bank,
and the controller of the money supply is a bank, and the interest rates, that's total, complete monopoly. It's a money trust.
You basically have you can't get out of the slavery. You can't get out of the constantly increasing supply of money, which is another thing I noticed and never really thought about, is that although they constantly will tell you that we're trying to keep inflation under control, we're trying to minimize the effects of it, if you look at it over a period of decades, it's always going up. It never goes down or disappears. It's basically on an upward tilt forever and ever and ever. The economics of it, eventually, it ends up destroying the economy and the people in it.
You have to ask yourself, why would this global system want to do that? It's just all about power. It's modern colonialism.
Well, again, it's economic slavery, and it's something that it took me till the age of 35 to go out and do my own personal investigation to understand how it works. I never learned it at the university, didn't learn it on the CPA exam, didn't learn it in the Big 8 accounting firm, and certainly didn't learn it at the IRS.
That's right. You went to one of the biggest and best accounting schools.
Well, I worked 3 years at KPMG Pete Marwick, but I never was taught. I had to go out and learn it on my own, and luckily D.V. Kidd was on a radio station that I gave some credibility to. If I had heard her just on a street corner or at a meeting somewhere, I probably would have just kept on walking.
I mean, just basically, is there anything you want to say to the people in Austin, Texas, Central Texas, people that tape this show and send it out to friends and family as well?
I guess the only thing I would say is I've seen evidence of an orchestrated campaign of painting a broad brush over people like Alex who really are telling you the truth. And I was one of those people that thought these were all kooky ideas, but I've come to realize that they are very true and very serious. And I'm very afraid for my own family, our own Americans' ability to make a living, to have a country that has a manufacturing base, to have a future. Our country is close to being destroyed economically through the banking and monetary system. And it's about time that people realize that they're being lied to, and they should start listening to people like Alex, because he is telling you the truth. I've checked it out.
And then what happened when you tried to show this to your superiors?
Well, there came a point when I realized that what I had to do was consolidate all of my evidence and facts into a central location. So I decided to write a report, and it's very similar to what I do in the Treasury Department, which was I'd investigate an allegation, I'd go out and interview witnesses, gather evidence, gather documents, follow the paper trail, and then summarize all that evidence and present a report to my superiors, which would either recommend that the person be prosecuted or recommend that the investigation be discontinued because there was not enough evidence to sustain a prosecution. So I put that evidence together, and I submitted it to my immediate superior, and I asked that it be submitted right up the chain to Commissioner Rosati. I realized that what I was doing was was going to rock the boat quite a bit, but I also knew that I had checked every one of these facts out and was over 100% certain of my findings. On February 8th of 1999 is actually the day that I submitted my report, and I asked that the commissioner or his designee commit in writing within 30 days to review my report. And I was only asking for a commitment. I didn't say I want all the answers in 30 days. Just commit to me. You'll look at it. I'm a federal law enforcement officer. I'm sworn to support and defend the Constitution, and I really see some serious constitutional problems with the federal income tax. So that was February 8th. February 11th, it went to my boss's boss. And from February 11th to February 17th, it went all the way to 1111 Constitution Avenue in Washington, D.C.
And that's Rossetti's office.
That's where Rossetti, his office is, as well as the Assistant Commissioner for Criminal Investigation. And I was told that my report not only went to Constitution Avenue, but at a minimum, the Assistant Commissioner for Criminal Investigation was aware of my report and the basics for what I was
Believe
presenting.
me, your report went right to Alan Greenspan. Or a word of it, a briefing did.
Well, it turns out that on the, let's see.
Well, see, that's the one thing they guard is at the upper levels is the great evil. And the one thing they cannot deal with, that they cannot stop is credible people from within their system coming out against them. And now you're doing magazine interviews and radio interviews, and you've got the evidence, you've got your website up. Listen, what would you say, before we finish the story, what would you say to the other IRS agents and the other law enforcement out there about this? I mean, you've taken a real risk here in what you've done.
I'm taking an incredible risk, but I believe that the risk of doing nothing is even worse. What federal law enforcement officers need to realize, as well as every state and local officer, is that the laws that the IRS agents are enforcing, they shouldn't be enforcing. And I don't believe that they should be cooperated with. If somebody is being prosecuted for failing to file a tax return, and they have done the research and found that there is no requirement to file a tax return, then I feel it's morally and legally wrong, for that person to be pursued, investigated, and prosecuted.
You're saying it's color of law is what's being used. The whole thing's run out of ignorance. People just don't know. They really think, look at those kooks, those weirdos, those liars, until you investigate.
That's right, and I feel bad that I spent time thinking those things, but it was out of ignorance. And now that I've researched and found that a lot of those claims are actually true, my hope is that law enforcement people will start trusting the citizens more than they have, and the citizens, hopefully when they see more law enforcement officers being honorable about these issues, will start to trust law enforcement again, and we can get back to a country where there's a lot of trust between the government and the governed, because it's only with the consent of the governed that the government exists.
I'm trying to hope that you guys can tune out from the sports and the bedlam and the diversions for just 5 minutes and realize what we're trying to tell you here. What we're trying to wake you up. I mean, this is some scary stuff. I mean, I'll pay taxes. I've said this 100 times. But my gosh, let it go to me and my family. Let it go to the country. Let it go to defense of this nation. Let it be honest and based in a strong, good nation. But if it's going to private banks and they feed it back into the cycle of slavery and there's no way to get out of this debt pit. In fact, as an accountant, Mr. Bannister, explain the whole debt pit. I mean, explain how there's no way to dig yourself out of this fiat system.
I mean, you've basically said it right there. It is a pit, and you never get out. You pay interest. You pay the sweat of your brow barely pays the interest on the debt. It never goes away. It's like indentured servitude.
It's like indentured servitude.
It's literally, as you work, you keep hoping for the day that debt is paid off and you are free. But it'll never come with the system as it stands. I mean, I remember agents going to so-called tax protester meetings, to get intelligence and find out what's going on. And I remember them coming back and laughing at the kooky stuff that they were talking about. And so that was just the general feeling that had been inculcated into people's minds. And it took me a couple of years to find out but it in fact...
Now, that's right. You talked about D.V. Kidd and other writers and her pamphlets and the executive orders they listed and the laws, the case law. What happened that first time whenever you went to the law library? Because you told that story on the radio, I thought it was interesting.
That I expected to find that it was all baloney, that they referred to court cases that didn't exist, or they took court cases out of context. And I found that every court case that she referred to, or any of the people that she had in her book list referred to, were correct, and they were right in the law library.
And how did that make you feel? I guess you wanted to dig deeper.
Yeah, because I had been taught, or at least led to believe, that I would immediately find the error of the evidence, that it wouldn't be there.
So they actually told you these guys are nothing but liars, you can't trust them.
Yeah, why bother looking? There's no sense in even looking into it, because it's a bunch of useless, out of context arguments that have been strung together, and they don't make any sense.
Mr. Bannister, have you got any calls since you've gone public and been doing all these radio and magazine interviews? Have you got any calls back from the IRS?
No, but I do have a lot of support within the IRS. There's, like I said, there's a lot of good people in there, and they are supportive of me. Of course, there's some that don't understand, but they haven't read any of the evidence either.
So you're a good example. Again, I mean, if you realize what you've done here, it's so good. If we can convince the people in the mechanisms of enforcement that they're enforcing something that's criminal, we can try to get back to that constitutional form of taxation and have a strong country.
Well, I don't know if you're probably familiar with a gentleman named Jack McLam.
Yes, Police Against the New World Order.
I understand that he's not well liked by government officials, and I've met him a number of times, and I find him to be a very gentle man, and somebody that just wants the Constitution to be followed.
He's not a criminal. He's a highly decorated Vietnam veteran, the most highly decorated police officer in Phoenix, Arizona history, and he was at the top. I mean, they loved him in the community. They were talking about him going for chief, all the rest of this stuff, and finally he found out about drug running and things and corruption and tried to speak about it, and he got fired.
And the thing about Jack is he's got a little saying that tyranny will come to your door in a uniform, and I can't think of a more true statement, and especially coming from me, who kicked down a lot of doors and did a lot of search warrants and searched through a lot of drawers and files and under beds, that's exactly how tyranny will come to your home, is in a uniform or with a bulletproof vest on or with a 6-hour 9mm as I carried.
And again, it's up to you guys out there in America, the police, the SWAT team commanders. You ought to ask yourselves, is it the crack dealer on the corner, or is it the white-collar criminal that you're worried about, the guy that's selling old ladies junk bonds? Or is it just the family that can't put the kids through school because of the federal income tax that goes right to the Federal Reserve? Again, that's true. Private, run for profit. You know, we've aired the actual training videos the IRS has, or pieces of it, where they admit that it goes right to the Federal Reserve. In fact, more and more, they're just admitting the truth, aren't they? They're just flagrantly out there flapping it in our faces.
Well, a lot of what I found is, actually all of what I found is publicly available, and the number of times that you see the word voluntary in the IRS manuals and in their pamphlets and booklets and instructions, I found it to be incredible.
So the king has no clothes.
That's what I found.
In fact, I think that's what we'll call this piece. The king has no clothes. Joe, anything else? And God bless you. You know, Joe worked hard today at the accounting firm he's working at, and we were in Northern California covering Operation Urban Warrior. Oh my gosh! And we called Joe up, and he met us right after work here at this little restaurant. Joe, any other points?
Again, just don't let people be painted with a broad brush where you're scared into not listening to what they have to say. D.V. Kidd, Bill Benson, Bill Conklin, Jack McLam, and many, many others are fine people, and they really have seen the very ugly underside of certain portions of our government. And I'm not anti-government. I'm not anti-tax. Alex is not. None of the people are. They are anti-corruption, though. and I'm anti-corruption, and
well, that's the sad part. You sit there and you try to talk about corruption, police running drugs, which we talked about, election fraud. Remember that at the county? And then it comes out it's true months after we bring it out and nothing's done. We're denied, being on the committee. We get called anti-government, black helicopter people, all the rest of this stuff. And it's only because, well, number one, I get a thrill out of standing up against corruption. I think that's the same thrill you got. I mean, it feels good, and I guess it did feel bad to find out that you'd been led along.
that's the reason I took the job. I could use my financial skills to find the fraud, to chase after the bad guys who don't actually get their fingers dirty with the crime. But the money ends up flowing, and you follow the money.
The puppet masters that create the havoc.
And that's, you find who's running the show when you follow the money.
Joe's got a website, and you can get all the information that was inside his brief that he wrote to his superiors, pretty much calling for a criminal investigation of the system. And what's your website again, Joe?
The website is www.freedomabovefortune.com. That's all one word, freedomabovefortune.com.
freedomabovefortune.com. And again,
since we first interviewed Mr. Bannister, again, he's been in USA Today, C-SPAN, and as we're making this tape, 60 Minutes is getting ready to do a hit piece on him. And 3 other high-level criminal investigators from the IRS have quit, and the numbers are only growing of those that are leaving but not going public. The truth is out. Private banks run this country. They're building prison camps everywhere. They're building prisons everywhere. They're trying to push a move in the mainstream media to disarm the American people using incrementalism. We face total dehumanization. You now know the truth about the comprehensive annual financial reports and the fact that county, city, state, federal governments are creating giant armed compound empires against us. They own over 70% of the stock market, and they keep sucking the money back out of us that they create with fiat, stealing our labor, our homes, dumbing down our children. There's 80 million gun owners in this country. They're pushing right now to disarm us. We have to refuse to become disarmed serfs in this country, or the tyranny is going to get really bad. This so-called war on terrorism is really a war on free individuals, no matter whether you're black or white, young or old. This is a fight against dehumanization, ladies and gentlemen. Make copies of this tape. Spread this information. Check it out for yourself. We're telling you the truth. This is a giant battle for our republic. The elite wants everything for themselves. This is the fight for humanity. It's that serious. Thank you for watching. Now take action. Many hands make light work.